This is my true story. I thought my family would celebrate me with love on my birthday. But when the cake came out, my own grandson had written one word in big letters: expired. Everyone laughed, and I stood there with a fake smile, broken inside. They thought it was funny. They thought I was too old to matter. But what they didn't know is that while he was cutting that cake, I was cutting off his future. You won't believe what I did next. But before that, tell me where you're watching from in comments, and please subscribe so more people hear my story. From the day my grandson was born, I treated him like he was my own second son. His parents were young, still figuring out their lives, and they often struggled financially. I stepped in, not because anyone asked me to, but because I wanted him to have the best chance in life. When his parents couldn't afford private school, I paid for it. When tutors were needed because he fell behind in math, I wrote the checks. When he wanted to play soccer, join music lessons, and even try robotics club, I made sure the fees were covered. Every extra dollar I could spare went into his education, his hobbies, his growth. I told myself this is what family is supposed to do: lift up the younger generation so they can reach heights we never could. I gave up things for myself without hesitation. While other women my age went on cruises, upgraded kitchens, or treated themselves to spa visits, I stayed home and put money away for him. I carried second-hand purses, wore shoes until the soles thinned, and cooked simple meals from scratch to save every possible cent. When I got small raises from my part-time job, I didn't spend them on myself. I funneled them into a fund that was supposed to guarantee his future. I set up a college account under my name, with him as the beneficiary. Each month, I contributed faithfully, whether it was $50 or $500, depending on what I could manage. Over time, it grew into tens of thousands of dollars, all meant for him. I told myself that one day, when he walked across a graduation stage, he would know his grandmother believed in him more than anyone else. I imagined the moment he would hug me with tears in his eyes and say, "Grandma, I couldn't have done this without you." That was the picture I carried in my mind as I aged, as my body grew slower, as my health became more fragile. My sacrifices were never about me. They were about him, about his future, about making sure he never knew the kind of hunger and insecurity I had as a child. It wasn't just money. I gave him my time, my energy, my love. When his parents argued, I was the one who took him in for the weekend. When he cried over a failed test, I sat at the kitchen table late into the night, reviewing flashcards with him until he understood. When he wanted to build a science project but didn't know where to start, I drove across town to buy him supplies, even if it meant skipping my own medicine for the week. He was my pride. He was my joy. I thought he was my legacy. I remember one summer when his parents couldn't afford camp. He sat around bored and restless, so I pulled some strings with a local church program and paid for him to go to a technology camp. When he came home excited about computers, I thought, this is it. This is what will set him up for life. I kept telling myself that all the effort, all the money, all the sleepless nights worrying about bills would one day come back as gratitude, love, and respect. I even set up legal paperwork to ensure that, no matter what happened to me, that account would remain safe. I guarded it like a dragon guards treasure, because to me, it was treasure. It was not just money. It was hope. Hope that when I was gone, he would remember me not as an old woman who cooked simple meals and wore worn-out shoes, but as the grandmother who built the foundation of his success. I didn't see the warning signs, or maybe I chose not to see them. As he grew older, he started to change. The sweet boy who once ran to hug me at the door began to roll his eyes when I spoke. The child who used to sit on my lap and beg for bedtime stories now barely looked up from his phone when I visited. Still, I kept giving. Still, I kept saving. Because love, real love, is not conditional. It gives even when it is not returned. I believed, perhaps foolishly, that one day he would see the truth of what I had done. that he would understand that every dollar in that fund was built on sacrifice, on skipped meals, on sleepless nights, on quiet prayers. That he would realize his grandmother loved him so fiercely that she put his future above her own comfort. That he would cherish me not for what I gave, but for the heart behind the giving. But what I learned instead was that love without respect becomes invisible. And sometimes, when people are given everything too easily, they grow entitled. They begin to believe it is theirs by right, not by gift. My grandson didn't see a woman who loved him. He saw an old woman who would always pay, always bend, always sacrifice. And somewhere along the line, he began to mistake kindness for weakness. I didn't know it then, but every joke he made about my age, every time he laughed at my slowness, every careless word he spoke, those were small cracks in the foundation of love I thought was unshakable. I kept patching over them with more giving, more saving, more silence. I thought love could heal disrespect. I thought time could teach gratitude. But what time taught me instead was something much colder. When you give everything and demand nothing, some people will take until there is nothing left, except their laughter at your expense. That college fund, sitting quietly in the bank, grew each year like a seed watered by my sacrifices. He never thanked me for it because he never knew the full truth. And I never told him because I wanted the day I revealed it to be special. I dreamed of seeing his face light up, of him saying, "Grandma, you saved me." But the face I eventually saw was not one of gratitude. It was a smirk, standing above a birthday cake that said one word about me: expired. As he grew into his teenage years, I noticed the change in his behavior more sharply. At first, I brushed it off as a phase, the kind of awkward arrogance that comes with hormones and wanting independence. But it didn't pass. It deepened. The boy who once listened closely to my stories now rolled his eyes when I spoke. If I repeated myself, which older people sometimes do, he would sigh dramatically and mutter, "You already said that, Grandma." His friends would laugh. He thought it was harmless fun, but every time he did it, it cut into me like a knife. When we sat at family dinners, he started making jokes about my hearing. If I asked someone to repeat themselves, he would cup his hand to his ear, lean forward, and shout exaggeratedly as if I were deaf. Everyone chuckled politely, but I saw the smirk on his face. It wasn't about making light conversation. It was about making me the punchline. I told myself not to react, because reacting would give him more reason to mock me. So I stayed quiet, swallowing the hurt, telling myself he was young, he would grow out of it. But the jokes didn't stop. They became sharper. He called me outdated, not just once, but many times, especially in front of his friends. "Grandma doesn't understand phones," he'd say. "Grandma still writes checks." They laughed, and he laughed too, proud of himself. I told myself that respect would come with maturity, that one day he would see past the wrinkles and gray hair and realize I had given him everything. But respect never came. Instead, he grew bolder, more careless with his words, more confident in turning me into a joke. Sometimes it was small things. If I forgot where I placed my glasses, he would shake his head and say, "Classic Grandma, memories gone." If I walked slowly across the room, he would shuffle his feet mockingly, pretending to limp. Even if the family didn't laugh loudly, I saw the way some of them smiled awkwardly, not knowing whether to correct him or ignore it. No one defended me. No one told him it was wrong. Silence in that way gave him permission. I carried these insults quietly because my love for him was bigger than my pride. I thought, he's still young. He doesn't know better. I thought maybe, just maybe, he would look back on these years with shame and apologize. But deep down, I also began to realize something dangerous. He didn't see me as a person anymore. To him, I was just old, just someone to mock, someone whose value had already passed. He thought of me as a relic, as if the years of sacrifice, the years of love, had expired with my youth. And yet, I kept giving. Every birthday, every holiday, I put money into his hands, presents into his lap, encouragement into his ears. Even when he looked down on me, I looked up to him, still hoping he would rise above his immaturity. I excused his behavior in my own heart, saying, "He's just stressed. He's just insecure. He'll grow." But what I was really doing was allowing disrespect to grow roots. One day, when his friends came over, I offered them cookies I had baked. Instead of thanking me, he said loudly, "Careful, guys. They're old-fashioned, probably taste expired, like everything else she makes." His friends laughed. I smiled weakly, though my chest felt like it was caving in. I held onto the plate as my hands shook, trying not to show them the pain. That moment, more than anything, made me realize he wasn't just thoughtless. He was proud of the cruelty. He thought it made him clever. He thought putting me down lifted him up. I started to see the pattern. Every time he was insecure about something, bad grades, fights with his parents, a loss in sports, he took it out on me. Mocking me gave him control. Making me the butt of the joke gave him an audience. And the more people laughed, the more powerful he felt. He didn't realize that each word, each sneer, each smirk was building a wall between us, brick by brick. A wall made not of age, but of disrespect. I tried in small ways to correct him. I would say gently, "That's not very kind," or "You shouldn't talk to people that way." But he would shrug it off or roll his eyes. "Relax, Grandma. It's just a joke." But jokes reveal truth. And the truth was that he didn't see me as the grandmother who raised him, who built his future, who sacrificed her comfort for his success. He saw me as a tired, fragile woman, good only for money and mockery. I thought about my own grandmother, long gone now. I remembered how I respected her, even in her weakest days. I remembered how I listened to her stories, how I held her hand gently because I knew her bones were fragile. I remembered how her wisdom guided me. And then I looked at my own grandson, laughing at my expense, and I realized the cycle of respect had been broken. He was not carrying forward what I had carried for my elders. Instead, he was dismantling it piece by piece with his arrogance. Every joke he made didn't just humiliate me. It erased a part of the love I thought we shared. It made me question everything. Did he ever really value me? Or was I always just the easy target, the one person he knew would never fight back? The grandmother who gave everything and asked for nothing so he could take without consequence? By the time I reached my next birthday, I had already grown numb to his comments. I expected the jokes, the mockery, the rolling eyes. I told myself, endure it one more year. Endure it because you love him. Endure it because maybe next year will be different. But deep down, I knew the truth. His words had become weapons, sharpened with every laugh, aimed at the very heart of who I was, and when the cake came out, I would finally see how far he was willing to go. My birthday came that year, and I told myself not to expect much. I didn't need gifts, I didn't need surprises, I didn't even need a big celebration. All I wanted was to sit with my family, share a meal, and feel like I mattered. That was enough for me. My children planned a small gathering at the house. They invited my grandchildren, some cousins, and a few neighbors. It wasn't extravagant, but I looked forward to it. I baked my own pie earlier in the day just to contribute, even though I knew there would be plenty of food. As the guests began to arrive, I greeted them with hugs, smiles, and warm words. I tried to push away the memories of my grandson's past mockery. I told myself, this is a new day, a new chance. Maybe today he will remember that I am his grandmother, not his punchline. For a while, everything seemed fine. People laughed, talked about work, shared stories. I watched the little ones play, their innocent giggles filling the house. It reminded me of when my grandson was small, running around with the same carefree joy. Those memories made me smile. Dinner was pleasant enough. I sat at the table, watching everyone eat and talk. I said silent prayers of gratitude for still being here, for still being part of their lives. I thought maybe this would be a good birthday. Maybe this time I would go to bed with a warm heart instead of an aching one. But then, as the plates were cleared, I noticed the whispers and smirks between my grandson and a few of his cousins. They were planning something, and I could feel the unease rising inside me. Finally, the lights dimmed slightly, and I heard the familiar sound of voices singing, "Happy Birthday." My heart fluttered. I looked toward the kitchen doorway, expecting a cake with candles, expecting a simple, kind gesture. And then I saw it. The cake was large, frosted in white with bright blue borders, but in the center, written in bold, dark icing, was a single word: expired. For a moment, I froze. My smile faltered, my hands trembled. I stared at that word as if it were burning itself into my chest. The room erupted with laughter, laughter that echoed and twisted around me like cruel music. Some laughed loudly, some chuckled awkwardly, some turned their heads to hide their discomfort. But my grandson stood tall, smirking, proud of his work. He thought he was clever. He thought he was funny. He thought humiliating his grandmother on her birthday was entertainment. I forced a smile, because what else could I do in that moment? I blew out the candles with shaking breath, pretending not to care. But inside, I was breaking. The word expired wasn't just icing on a cake. It was a message, a declaration, a stamp on my existence. To him, I was done. I was irrelevant. I was old, outdated, useless. He didn't see the woman who had raised him, sacrificed for him, loved him more than herself. He saw only an expiration date. The laughter cut deeper than any insult ever had. Birthdays are supposed to be about celebration, about love, about making someone feel valued. Instead, mine became a stage for mockery. My heart felt heavy in my chest, and yet I sat there, nodding politely, pretending the joke didn't wound me. Because if I let them see the pain, the humiliation would have been worse. I caught glimpses of others at the table. A few of them looked uncomfortable, but they stayed silent. Not one person told him to stop. Not one person said, "That's too far." And that silence was just as painful as the laughter, because silence meant approval. Silence meant they thought I was expendable too. I remember looking at the cake again as the knife was passed around. That word stared back at me like a cruel reminder: expired. I thought about all the birthdays before this one, when I had saved every dollar just to buy him gifts, when I had stayed up all night baking for him, when I had given him everything just so he could smile. And now, the gift he gave me was public humiliation. He didn't know, not yet, that I was the one who held his future in my hands. He didn't know that while he was laughing at me, the money for his education, his dreams, his next steps in life, still belonged to me. I hadn't touched it in years, but it was there, waiting, growing. He assumed it was his, as if it were his right. But the truth was, it wasn't his at all. It was mine. I was the one who had built it, guarded it, sacrificed for it. And in that moment, as I stared at that cruel word, I realized something. Love had blinded me, but humiliation had opened my eyes. I didn't argue, I didn't scold, I didn't make a scene. I just smiled faintly, let him cut the cake, and swallowed the bitterness like poison. But in my mind, a decision was forming. He wanted to stamp me with expired? Fine. If I was expired in his eyes, then I would expire the life he thought was guaranteed. He believed his future was secured, untouchable. He was wrong, very wrong. The room eventually moved on. The laughter faded into casual chatter, and the night ended. Guests left, plates were cleaned, and everyone went home. I sat quietly in my chair, staring at the empty cake plate. My heart still ached, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. They thought the joke ended at the cake, but for me, that was where it began. The sound of that laughter never left me. It clung to me like a shadow. As I sat there with the knife cutting through the word expired, I felt like I was being carved open too. Every chuckle, every smirk, every sideways glance was another cut. I saw my grandson's face clearly in that moment, his grin wide, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction, as if humiliating me was his greatest achievement. He was proud. He wanted everyone to see what he had done. He wanted to make me small, to remind the room that in his mind I was already finished, already forgotten, already a burden past my use. What hurt more than his smirk was the way the room responded. Some laughed openly, throwing their heads back, their voices rising above the flicker of the candles. Some laughed softly, covering their mouths with their hands, pretending it wasn't cruel even as their eyes betrayed amusement. Others stayed silent, shifting uncomfortably in their chairs, glancing away but saying nothing. That silence was the loudest of all, because silence is agreement, silence is permission. And in that moment, their silence told me that my worth was negotiable, that my humiliation was entertainment, that my pain was acceptable as long as it kept the mood light. I forced a smile. My lips curved upward, but inside my chest my heart cracked. I wanted to cry, but I refused to give him that satisfaction. He had taken my dignity in front of everyone, but I would not give him my tears. So I smiled, blew out the candles, and pretended. Pretended it was all fine, pretended it didn't matter, pretended I didn't hear the sting in the word expired. But the truth was, I heard nothing else. Even as people sang, even as the knife cut the cake, even as the pieces were served, all I could hear in my mind was that word echoing again and again. Expired, expired, expired. When I was younger, birthdays had always been my favorite. They were not about gifts or parties, but about love. I remembered the way I used to make his birthdays special. I baked cakes shaped like dinosaurs, superheroes, or soccer balls, depending on what he loved that year. I stayed up late wrapping gifts, hiding them so he would be surprised in the morning. I gave him everything I could so that he felt valued, celebrated, cherished. And now here I was, on my own birthday, the one day meant to honor me, standing at the center of a room where my own grandson reduced me to a joke. The contrast was unbearable. Every bite of that cake tasted bitter to me, no matter how sweet the frosting was. Because I wasn't tasting sugar, I was tasting betrayal. I watched as he laughed with his friends, proud of his prank. I saw him nudge his cousin, pointing at me as if he had accomplished something brilliant. The look in his eyes was not just playful mischief, it was superiority. He saw himself as above me, as if mocking me made him important, as if belittling me made him strong. He forgot everything I had given him. He forgot that the very shoes he wore to that party, the very education that made him feel smart, the very life he was living, had been paid for by me. And yet, in that moment, none of it mattered to him. To him, I was not a grandmother who sacrificed. I was an old woman past her time, someone to mock, someone whose life could be summed up by one word on a cake. My humiliation was his entertainment, and the room went along with it. That was the worst part, not just his cruelty, but the complicity of others. Because no one stood up for me. No one said, "That's wrong." No one put him in his place. They all let it happen, and in letting it happen, they told me exactly what I was to them: expendable. As I sat there with my slice of cake untouched, I thought about how fragile love really is. For years, I believed that my sacrifices would guarantee me respect. For years, I thought love and loyalty were natural rewards for giving everything. But sitting there, humiliated, I realized love without respect is just charity. It means nothing to the one who receives it if they do not value the giver. And my grandson didn't value me. He valued my money, my time, my effort, but not me, not the person, not the grandmother who gave it all. Humiliation is a strange thing. It doesn't always break you in the moment. Sometimes it sits inside you quietly, like a seed. That night, It planted itself in me, and I felt something shift. I had lived my whole life trying to give, trying to love, trying to forgive. But as I sat there with the word expired staring back at me, I knew I couldn't just forgive this. Not this time. Not when the boy I raised chose to turn me into a public joke. Not when the family I fed chose laughter over loyalty. Something inside me hardened. I looked at my grandson as he laughed, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see him as my boy. I saw him as a stranger who had taken my kindness and turned it into weakness, a stranger who thought he could mock me without consequence, a stranger who forgot that the same woman he called expired was the one who held the key to his future. Because while he thought the joke ended at the cake, I knew it was just the beginning. When the night ended and everyone left, I sat in silence in my chair, staring at the crumbs left on the table. My hands trembled, but not from sadness anymore, from resolve. They thought I was expired, but I was not finished. My story was not over. That night of humiliation gave birth to something new inside me, the decision to remind him and everyone else that I was not weak, I was not irrelevant, I was not expired. What my grandson did not realize that night, as he laughed at me over that cake, was that his entire future rested in my hands. He thought he was the clever one. He thought he had the power. But the truth is, everything he was proud of, everything he was looking forward to, had been built by me. While he was busy writing expired on my cake, I had been writing checks for his life for years. His school fees, his sports, his tutoring, his music lessons, all of it. And beyond that, something even bigger, the college fund. The one he didn't even understand fully, but the one I had poured myself into for nearly 2 decades. That fund wasn't small. It wasn't pocket change. It was tens of thousands of dollars, built piece by piece, sacrifice by sacrifice. When his parents were too deep in debt, I stepped up. When he wanted things they couldn't afford, I made it happen. And all the while, I was putting money into that account. An account that legally sat under my name, with him listed as the intended beneficiary. He assumed it was already his. He bragged about it to his friends sometimes, saying, "Grandma's got me covered for college." He walked through life as if his future was secured. He didn't know that legally. It was never his until I gave it to him. That was the forgotten truth. He believed my sacrifices were guarantees, as if love meant obligation. He thought everything I built was his by right, as if I owed him. But I didn't owe him anything. Everything I gave was out of love. Everything I saved was out of hope. I gave because I wanted to, not because I had to. And the same way I gave, I could also take away. He never thought about that. He never respected that. He believed he was entitled, not blessed. I remembered the nights I skipped meals just to save a little more. I remembered the times I chose generic medicine over the name brand so I could deposit an extra $50 into that fund. I remembered the vacations I never took, the clothes I never bought, the repairs I delayed on my own house, all because I wanted him to have a better future. And yet, he had the audacity to mock me, to humiliate me, to write expired on my birthday cake as if my worth was already gone. He forgot that the very thing he mocked was the same thing that was keeping his dreams alive. The truth is, I had always thought of that fund as untouchable. I told myself, this is his future. No matter what happens, this is for him. But humiliation changes things. That night, I realized something. Why should I continue to save for someone who didn't respect me? Why should I keep pouring my love into a boy who thought my life had expired? Respect is the foundation of love, and without it, love collapses. He forgot that the future he bragged about was never promised. It was mine to give, or mine to take back. As I sat in my chair that night, staring at the crumbs of that cruel cake, I thought about every dollar in that account. Each one carried a memory. Each one carried a sacrifice. And every memory, every sacrifice, had been trampled by his arrogance. He thought he had humiliated me, But what he really did was remind me of the power I still held. He mocked my age, forgetting that age also means wisdom. He mocked my slowness, forgetting that slowness also means patience. He mocked my life, forgetting that I was the one who built his. That was the forgotten truth. He was not the one in control. I was. He could laugh, he could smirk, he could write whatever words he wanted on cakes, but the ink that truly mattered was mine. The ink on the bank forms, the ink on the account documents, the ink that could erase his future in a single stroke. He thought I was expired, but he forgot that the account had my name on it, not his. I remembered something else too. Years earlier, when I set up the fund, the banker had looked at me and said, "Just remember, as long as it's under your name, you're the owner. You can do whatever you want with it." At the time, I nodded, never imagining I would ever use that power against him. But now, those words came back to me with sharp clarity. You can do whatever you want with it. And suddenly, I understood. I didn't have to sit quietly and accept humiliation. I didn't have to let him laugh while he stood on the foundation I built. I had the power to remind him that respect is not optional. It is earned. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat awake, replaying everything in my mind, the cake, the laughter, the smirk, and then the image of that bank account sitting there untouched, waiting for him, waiting for me. I realized that the only way to teach him was not through words, not through lectures, because he didn't listen. The only way was through action. The only way was to take back what he thought was already his, because nothing stings more than losing what you thought was guaranteed. By the time the sun rose, I felt different, stronger, clearer. They thought I was expired. But what they didn't know was that expiration is not the end. It is a warning, and the warning was his. The forgotten truth was now my weapon, and I intended to use it. The moment the knife sliced through that word on the cake, expired, something sliced through me as well. But it wasn't weakness this time. It wasn't despair. It was clarity. As my grandson laughed, as others chuckled nervously, as the room pretended nothing cruel had happened, I made my decision. I didn't speak it aloud. I didn't argue. I didn't scold. I let the night end quietly, with my fake smile hiding the storm in my chest. But inside, I was already done giving. That night, I decided his future would no longer be mine to build. It would be mine to break. I excused myself politely when the dinner was over, saying I was tired. I hugged him the same way I always had, though my arms were stiff this time, and I kissed his cheek as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I looked him in the eye and thought, "You just buried your own future while cutting that cake." He smirked, still drunk on his little performance, not realizing I had already cut deeper than he ever could. When I got home, I didn't cry. I didn't sit in my chair and replay the humiliation like I used to with his past insults. I sat at my table, turned on the small lamp, and pulled out the folder that held all the documents for his college fund. For years, I had protected that folder like it was gold. I never let it out of my sight. And as I laid it on the table, I felt a strange calmness settle over me. I realized I was no longer the grandmother who hoped for gratitude. I was no longer the woman who believed love would fix disrespect. I was the woman who would take control back. The decision wasn't born from anger. It was born from truth. He had shown me exactly how he saw me, not as family, not as someone to honor, not as someone to protect, but as a joke, as a burden, as someone whose life had already expired. And if that was the case, then he no longer deserved the sacrifices I made. I would not let him walk into college on my back, laughing at me along the way. I would not let him take my love and turn it into entitlement. If I was expired, then so was his future under my hand. That night, I wrote in my notebook, the one where I kept small reminders for myself. I wrote a single line, "Tomorrow, I take it back." That line stared at me with the same weight as the word on the cake, but this time, it didn't break me. It steadied me. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't giving blindly. I was making a choice, a deliberate choice to teach him what respect really means. I thought back on all the times I had let him mock me, every eye roll, every smirk, every outdated comment, every cruel laugh. I thought of how I had swallowed the pain and stayed silent. That silence had given him permission. That silence had made him bold. But now, my silence was not weakness. It was preparation. He thought he had won when he humiliated me at that table. He thought his laughter had the last word. But the last word was mine, and it was already forming in my mind. The more I sat with the decision, the more right it felt. It wasn't revenge for the sake of cruelty. It was balance. It was justice. It was the reminder that you cannot spit on the hands that built your life and still expect those hands to feed you. He had forgotten who held the real power, but I hadn't. He believed money magically appeared in accounts with his name. He believed college was waiting for him as a guarantee. He believed his grandmother's sacrifices were obligations, not gifts. And that ignorance, that arrogance, was exactly why I knew what I had to do. When I went to bed that night, I didn't toss and turn like I usually did. I slept deeply. For the first time in years, my heart was not heavy with disappointment. It was light with resolve. I knew exactly what tomorrow would bring. I would walk into that bank. I would show my identification. I would empty the account, and I would take back every cent I had poured into him. Not because I wanted to spend it recklessly, not because I wanted to hurt him without reason, but because he had to learn. Respect cannot be forced with words, but it can be taught with consequences. The next morning, I rose with steady hands. I brewed my coffee, ate my toast, and dressed neatly. No one knew what I was about to do. Not my children, not my neighbors, not even him. As far as he was concerned, life was normal. He thought he had cut his cake and gone home with a victory. But what he didn't know was that while he was busy cutting a word into me, I was cutting him out of a future he thought was untouchable. It was a strange feeling, this quiet power. For years I had felt powerless under his arrogance, under the family's silence. But now I understood. I had never been powerless. I had simply forgotten the truth. He was the one who depended on me, not the other way around. And with that realization, my decision solidified. This wasn't just about the money. It was about dignity. It was about respect. It was about teaching him that mocking the people who build your foundation is the fastest way to lose it. As I gathered the documents into my purse, I whispered to myself, no more. No more sacrificing for someone who saw me as a joke. No more pretending humiliation was love. No more waiting for gratitude that would never come. I had made my decision. And once I make a decision, I never go back. The next morning, I woke up with a kind of energy I hadn't felt in years. I didn't drag myself out of bed like I usually did. I didn't stare at the ceiling wondering how much longer I had before I became useless in their eyes. I rose with purpose. I showered, dressed neatly, put on my best shoes, and brushed my gray hair until it sat smoothly against my head. I looked in the mirror and told myself, today, you take back what's yours. My hands didn't tremble. My back didn't ache. For once, I didn't feel old. I felt strong. I gathered every piece of paper I had kept safe all these years, the account details, the identification documents, the letters from the bank. I slipped them carefully into my worn leather purse. That purse had carried groceries, prescriptions, and grandchildren's toys over the years. But today, it carried something much heavier, my decision. I walked to the bus stop with steady steps, each one lighter than the last. Nobody knew where I was going, and I liked it that way. It was my secret, my justice, my plan. The bank sat on the corner of Main Street, tall glass windows reflecting the morning sun. I had been there many times before, depositing money for that very account, each visit fueled by hope. But today, it wasn't hope that carried me inside. It was resolve. I pushed open the heavy glass door and walked in, head high. The smell of polished floors and fresh paper filled the air. I stepped up to the counter, where a young teller with perfect hair and a practiced smile greeted me. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you today?" I placed the documents on the counter. "I need to access my account," I said firmly. She asked for my ID, and I slid it over without hesitation. She typed quickly on her computer, her nails clicking against the keyboard. After a moment, she looked up and said, "Yes, I see the account here. What would you like to do?" My heart pounded, but my voice stayed steady. "I'd like to close it, and I want the full balance transferred into my personal account." For a split second, she blinked in surprise. People don't often close accounts like that, not ones with so much history, not ones with that kind of balance. She glanced at me again, maybe wondering if I knew what I was doing. But I did. I knew exactly what I was doing. She nodded politely. "Of course, ma'am. We'll need a signature on these forms." She printed out the paperwork, sliding it across the counter. As I picked up the pen, my hand hovered for just a second. I thought about all the years I had put money into this account. I thought about the vacations I never took, the clothes I never bought, the comfort I denied myself, all for him. I thought about the word on that cake, expired, and how his laughter had filled the room. And then, without hesitation, I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name in clear, bold letters. That signature was more than ink. It was my declaration. I was not expired. The teller processed the request, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard again. She printed a receipt, stamped it, and handed it to me. "The transfer will be complete by the end of the day," she said. I folded the papers carefully and slipped them back into my purse. A strange calmness washed over me. It was done. Years of sacrifice had just changed direction. The future he thought was guaranteed had been erased in minutes. As I walked out of the bank, the morning sun felt brighter on my face. The air felt lighter in my lungs. For the first time in years, I wasn't weighed down by the burden of giving to someone who didn't value me. I wasn't saving for a boy who saw me as a joke. I was free. The money was mine again, legally and fully. Every cent represented not his entitlement, but my strength. I didn't tell anyone what I had done, not my children, not my neighbors, not even my closest friend. It was my secret to keep until the moment came when he would discover the truth himself. I wanted him to feel the shock, the panic, the realization that his arrogance had consequences. He had written "expired" on my cake, and now I had written "canceled" on his future. When I got home, I placed the documents back in my folder and set it neatly in my drawer. I brewed myself a cup of tea, sat at the kitchen table, and let the satisfaction sink in. It wasn't joy. It wasn't bitterness. It was peace. For years, I had lived with humiliation, with silence, with quiet endurance. But now, I had balance. I had reclaimed something that was always mine. I thought of his face when he would open the account and see nothing there. I thought of the way his arrogance would collapse into panic. I thought of how he would look at me, confused, desperate, begging for answers. And I knew I would give him none, because some lessons are not taught with words. Some lessons are written in loss. That day, I didn't feel old. I didn't feel expired. I felt alive. And for the first time in a long time, I felt respected. Not by him, not by anyone else, but by myself. Because I had finally chosen myself over someone who had chosen to mock me. Weeks passed quietly after I closed the account. I didn't mention it to anyone, and life went on as usual. My grandson still strutted around, full of confidence, certain his future was waiting for him like a neatly wrapped gift. He talked openly about the colleges he was considering. He bragged to friends about how tuition wasn't a problem for him because his grandmother had set everything up. He carried himself like the world owed him a smooth road forward, and I just watched, silent, calm, knowing what was coming. The day of reckoning arrived when the first tuition payment was due. He and his parents sat down to finalize the paperwork, only to find the account empty. At first, they thought it was a mistake. They called the bank, demanded answers, and the bank confirmed it clearly. The account had been closed by the legal owner. That legal owner was me. The money had been transferred to my personal account weeks earlier. My grandson's smug grin turned into confusion, then panic, then anger. He stormed into my house the very next day. His voice was loud, his face red with fury. "Grandma, what did you do?" he shouted. He waved papers in my face, bank statements that showed the balance was gone. "This was my college money. You can't just take it." His arrogance was still there, but underneath it I saw something new: fear. Real fear. Because for the first time in his life, the safety net he thought was unbreakable had vanished. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply reached into my drawer and pulled out a copy of the final bank statement. I slid it across the table toward him. On top of it, I placed a note I had written days earlier, waiting for this exact moment. The note was short, only a few words. Expired funds for expired respect. He stared at it, his mouth opening and closing as if he couldn't find the words. For once, he had nothing to say. The silence that filled the room was heavier than any argument could have been. His eyes darted from the paper to me, disbelief written across his face. You can't do this," he stammered finally. "You owe me that money. You promised." His voice cracked, and I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because of the absurdity. I didn't owe him anything. I never promised him the money. I built it for him out of love, not obligation. And the same way I built it, I had every right to take it back. I looked at him and spoke calmly, my voice steady and clear. "I don't owe you anything. You thought it was yours because you forgot who put it there. You forgot who made the sacrifices. You forgot who skipped meals, who saved every cent, who gave up her comfort so you could have a future, and then you humiliated me. You mocked me in front of everyone. You called me expired, but now it is your future that is expired." He went silent again, his anger colliding with the realization of truth. For the first time, he saw me not as the weak, outdated grandmother he thought I was, but as the woman who still held power. His arrogance crumbled in front of me, replaced by desperation. He begged then, his tone shifting, his voice softer. "Please, Grandma, I need that money. I can't go to school without it." But his begging didn't move me, because I knew those words weren't born from love or respect. They were born from entitlement and fear. The aftermath spread through the family like wildfire. His parents called me, shocked, demanding to know why I had done it. They accused me of being cruel, of destroying his future. I listened quietly, and then reminded them of the cake, of the word written on it, of the laughter they had allowed. "If you stood silent when he humiliated me, you don't get to speak now," I told them. "Respect goes both ways. He lost it, so he lost the money too." There was no more to say after that. Over the next weeks, I watched my grandson struggle. His friends went off to college while he scrambled to find alternatives. He tried to apply for loans, but without the account to back him, it wasn't easy. The arrogance that once lit up his face faded. The smirk was gone. The laughter was gone. In its place was bitterness and confusion. He couldn't understand how the world had shifted so quickly beneath him. But I understood. This was the weight of consequences. I didn't revel in his pain. I didn't celebrate his downfall, but I also didn't regret my decision. For years, I had been silent while he mocked me, believing love meant enduring humiliation. But now, my silence had meaning. My silence had weight, and it taught him what no lecture ever could, that you cannot mock the very person holding your ladder and still expect to climb. At family gatherings afterward, he avoided me. He couldn't look me in the eye. The boy who once strutted proudly now slumped in corners, quieter than before. The family whispered about what I had done, some judging me, some secretly admiring me. I didn't care either way, because for the first time in years, I felt respected, not because anyone said it, but because I had respected myself. The aftermath wasn't just about money, it was about balance. I had reminded him, and everyone else, that I wasn't expired. I wasn't irrelevant. I wasn't a joke. I was the one who gave, and I was the one who could take away. And that truth would follow him longer than any lost college fund ever could. After the shouting, after the begging, after the arguments with his parents, what came next was silence. Not peace, not comfort, silence. My grandson stopped calling me. He stopped visiting. At family gatherings, he sat far away from me, his head down, his eyes avoiding mine. The boy who once smirked and mocked now couldn't even look me in the face. The arrogance had drained out of him. In its place was shame, though he didn't have the courage to admit it out loud. That silence told me everything. I had lived with silence before, but it was different then. Before, my silence was submission. I stayed quiet while he mocked me. I stayed quiet while the family laughed at my expense. I swallowed words, I swallowed pride, I swallowed tears. But this silence was not mine, it was his, and his silence was heavier than all my years of endurance, because now he was the one swallowing something he couldn't spit out, the consequences of his own disrespect. He tried to pretend in front of others that he was fine. He told his friends he was taking a gap year. He told cousins he was figuring out his options. He acted like it was his choice, like life was still under his control, but I could see the cracks in his performance. The boy who once laughed the loudest now sat quietly at the edges. The boy who once mocked my memory now stumbled when he spoke, searching for words that didn't sound like excuses. The boy who once wrote "expired" on my cake now looked expired himself, drained, dull, and uncertain. The silence stretched into weeks, then months. His parents tried to repair it at first. They called me, saying, "You've made your point. Give him the money back now." They said he had learned his lesson, that he was sorry even though he hadn't said the words himself. But I didn't move. I didn't bend. I didn't break. Because lessons aren't learned through shortcuts. Lessons are learned through pain, through time, through silence that eats at you when no one is watching. If he couldn't open his mouth to apologize, then he hadn't learned anything at all. And so the silence stayed. At night, I wondered if he hated me. Maybe he did. But hate was better than the smug indifference he once carried. Hate meant he knew I was real. Hate meant he knew I had power. Hate meant he couldn't dismiss me anymore. I had become the wall he couldn't climb, the door he couldn't open, the voice he couldn't silence. Because even in my quiet, I was louder than his laughter had ever been. The rest of the family adjusted around the silence, like people walking around a crack in the floor. They didn't bring up the money anymore, at least not to my face. They didn't mention the account, the bank, or the word on the cake. But I saw it in their eyes. I saw the way they looked at me differently. Some looked at me with anger, thinking I had gone too far. Others looked at me with a kind of reluctant respect, as if they realized I wasn't the weak old woman they thought I was. Either way, I didn't care, because their opinions didn't matter anymore. I had chosen myself. My grandson, though, could not escape the silence. His laughter had once been his weapon, his shield, his performance. But now, laughter betrayed him. Every time he heard someone laugh, I knew it reminded him of that night, of that word, of how he had turned his grandmother into a joke, and how that joke had destroyed his future. The sound of laughter haunted him the way it had once haunted me. That was justice. Sometimes I caught him staring at me across the room at family gatherings. His eyes were different now, not arrogant, not mocking, but hollow, uncertain, like he wanted to speak but couldn't, like the words wouldn't come. That silence between us grew larger than any insult he had ever thrown at me, and I didn't fill it. I let it sit there, heavy and cold, because he needed to feel it. He needed to live inside it. People think revenge is loud, angry words, big gestures, screaming matches, but the strongest revenge is silence. Not the silence of weakness, but the silence of power. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to explain. I didn't need to justify myself. I let the empty accounts speak for me. I let his rejection letters from colleges speak for me. I let the awkward stares of family members speak for me. My silence became a mirror, and in that mirror, he saw what he had done. Every day that passed without an apology was proof that he still hadn't truly learned. But every day that passed without me breaking my silence was proof that I had. I had learned that love without respect is nothing. I had learned that giving without gratitude is just feeding entitlement. And I had learned that sometimes the only way to be heard is to say nothing at all. The silence that stretched between us was not just punishment, it was transformation. It changed him. It changed me. And though he would never admit it out loud, I knew that silence weighed on him more than my words ever could. Because silence is inescapable. It follows you when you lie in bed at night. It echoes in your head when you're alone. It fills the spaces laughter used to occupy. And for my grandson, that silence became the constant reminder that the grandmother he mocked was the grandmother who ended his future. Justice didn't come to me in the form of applause or recognition. It came in the quiet moments, the simple choices I finally made for myself. For years, I denied myself comfort so my grandson could have more. I wore old clothes, carried a worn purse, lived in a house that needed repairs, all because I thought every dollar belonged to his future. But once I closed that account, once I reclaimed what was mine, I realized justice was not about hurting him. It was about finally valuing myself. With the money now in my personal account, I started making small changes. I bought myself a new recliner, soft and supportive, so my aching back could finally rest. I fixed the leak in my roof that I had ignored for years. I replaced the old stove with a modern one that made cooking easier. None of it was extravagant, but each purchase reminded me that my sacrifices had worth. I was not expired. I was alive, and I deserved dignity. I didn't spend recklessly. I didn't throw money away just to prove a point. I used it wisely, for comfort, for peace of mind, for small joys I had long delayed. I booked a short trip to the coast, something I had dreamed of but never allowed myself to do. I sat on the shore, watching the waves, feeling the salt air on my face, and I thought, this is what my years of sacrifice were supposed to bring me. Not mockery, not humiliation, but peace. My grandson, meanwhile, learned to live without entitlement. His silence became his punishment. His absence became his reminder. I didn't need to lecture him. The empty account did all the teaching. Each time he thought about the opportunities lost, he remembered the word he had written on my cake. He had called me expired, but in truth, it was his future that had expired that night. The family eventually stopped asking me about the money. They realized I wasn't going to change my mind. Some judged me quietly, but others respected me more than they ever had. Because for once, I stood up for myself. For once, I showed them that my love had limits, that my sacrifices were not to be taken for granted. I sit now in my home, comfortable, surrounded by the things I once denied myself. And when I think back to that night, to the cake, to the laughter, I don't feel broken anymore. I feel strong. My final thought is simple. He wrote expired on my cake. I wrote canceled on his future. That was justice. My justice.